How's the energy? I mean, we're good. It's kind of like a tough slot, right? I think there's a lot of content that was shared that was highly valuable that I would like to come back with in just a conversation that took place here. But I have my 15 minutes and I'll try to touch on a couple of them. But what I also wanted to do is share a little bit of my personal story that I'm finding my way on how I can make most meaningful impact on this transition, as well as why that is something important to me. And that starts with a journey that 10 years ago I joined an initiative in Holland called Just Dig It. Really simple, digging trenches in areas in Africa where there was enough gradient, there was enough rain, but the soil had kind of become too hard, so the water would just run off. But it had the potential. And what they did is, at a scale that you could see on Google Maps, 5 by 6 kilometers, they started digging trenches, and within 2-3 years, visibly, nature regenerated itself. Didn't take much more work than that. It's just enabling nature to do its part. Now, the next thing is, okay, that's a simple solution. How do you think about scaling that? And that is, of course, trying to get public funding. There's all the philanthropy that comes with it, as well as trying to kind of run the projects, so become a large-scale project developer. But we found out that that was the hardest thing to do, to kind of export that model and try to do that on the ground in Africa, in Kenya, Tanzania. So what we started doing is road shows. Simple, putting a projector on the back of a pickup truck to the local communities, educate people about all the potential that was there to have seed banks that would generate small local revenues. And that's how it started scaling across Kenya, Tanzania, and Morocco as well. And it's become a large drive. But a lot of adoption that had to be done to make it work in the local community and have it land in the local community. That for me also means that that is the transition that we need to understand. It's not a one kind of silver bullet that we can do on regenerative agriculture and make that happen. Now, there's nothing better than kids, and most of the parents can relate to this, where there's universal experiences that we all share when we have kids. There's the sleepless nights of the young born. There is the first negotiations on at what time they should be home from a party, always tough. And also the decade of questions about why this and why that there. And there comes a day that, it becomes not only annoying, but they start asking questions that might make you reflect that you might not be looking at things in the right way. And my daughter, who studied in marketing, was challenging me when I was working at South Pole before. Offset, yeah, part of it, but doesn't it kind of create a risk of doing a short-term action rather than doing a large transition in that way? So I could never convince her about the full long-term impact. So when I was looking at a new opportunity, I looked around to find a place where that big scale impact lies ahead of us and would be potential. So that is where I looked at how can I bring, when I joined Regrow as GM in Europe, which is about a month ago, is what is the job at hand? Of course, I'm here to help grow the Regrow business, but more importantly, is what is the impact? Little to the comparable to the Just Dig It opportunity. What is the end game that we're looking at? And one thing I already referred to, it's not about scaling, it's about replicating good ideas really quickly. So that part of it we need to embrace. The other thing that I found looking at companies, so many of them are doing pilots, but they're doing it at a scale that are impossible to kind of really replicate. I'm not going to use the word scale, but replicate to large areas, because they haven't kind of analyzed the full impact that can be made and then moved back and said at what scale do we need to do our pilots to be able to run out. And one example I shared also this morning is Dutch guy who's really into this, Wouter Crul, who's now organizing a program where there's 5 revenue models that he's pieced together that could sustain farmers with sustainable services. And he's getting 1,000 farmers, so 100 per business model or a little bit more, to validate that idea. So in 3-4 years, we'll know which of those models work and then be able to scale that around. And that's a kind of the size that for me is inspiring, because now we're saying we're doing this with the end in mind of being able to scale. So for me, that is key part of why I am in the Regrow role as well. How do we think about running those experiments besides providing that foundational layer on really measuring at a high level of quality in field what the baseline is, as well as what the impact is. The other part is indeed about sharing the data to be able to do this. Data is the new oil, data is the new soil, there is that play. I've been in different kind of AI and digital enterprises, and the idea that you should keep your data, so that's a competitive advantage, when you think about, doesn't really help the industry as such, because you need the large data sets to train. So for me, also, there's a call to action to let's share the data about all the projects we run and make that a federated model so the people who generated the data can actually be rewarded for it in a way. But it will allow us to scale the kind of models and the impacts that we also greatly desire, rather than making it a small, profitable business for one enterprise. So that's another part of it. Now, going to Regrow, how do we look at that and what do we do? We do 3 things. So we started on crop insights on the left-hand side. That's how we started in our business, because that was the original part. We have 2 other products, and underlying it are 2 technologies that I'll explain a little bit more, but there is soil models based on DNDC, so really highly precise, descriptive models about what is happening below soil in terms of carbon, in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus, which is supported by a large ecosystem of academics. There is also an open source version of that model available. What it is because it really describes the details of what's happening below soil, you can use it with some training as a predictive model to what the buildup will be dependent on the measures that you're adopting. As well as then the remote sensing part of showing and analyzing what the baselines have been and what the adoption is. So we do that in sustainable insights that our large clients basically look at, here's my supply shed. We'll then go back to 10 years history, understand what rotational crops and what other practices have been applied. That will be validated, of course, and then at that time, we'll generate a top 3 list of practices to adopt where and identify the biggest areas where they can make improvement, which then moves into the MRV, which has been approved by CAR. We're also submitted a project to Vera, and we're piloting with SustainCert on their Scope 3 protocol that they're developing, as well as reporting to the protocols that the large players like Cargill, a client for us, or General Mills or Unilever have kind of defined themselves, while the big standards wasn't there. So we then go to really kind of high-level accuracy reporting of the impact and allowing for practice changes to be done. What's the strength about that? Farmers know what they'll get from a reward at the end, and therefore there's a contract that our clients establish with the farmer, saying if you apply these practices, here's the reward we'll give you. And then the kind of risk of the difference between the projected outcome, that is then kind of taken by the CPG companies, because they feel that the models we're providing them gives them enough confidence to be able to do that. I talked about this, so for me, it's important that we all can kind of move towards a standard that we all feel comfortable with. I would rather have 1 or 2 standards that we all embrace, because that will allow us to learn much faster about that. But at the moment, of course, we know there's 3 and they're moving at different speeds here, but we're ready to report and have projects under any of these. I talked about the number, but there's a kind of an acceleration that is happening when you start being dedicated to just being the tech company that has the science for the soil as well as the management practices. So there's a set of crops as well as a set of management practices which we're deploying, and as we started mainly in North America, we're really kind of expanding in Europe rather quickly within 1 year to 6 new countries and looking to do a similar thing next year. Why can we do that? Because of the kind of process model we use. We don't need a full data set to calibrate a new model. We more or less can kind of transfer the model and understand what 70% accuracy of that model would be. And at the end, our clients are then benefiting from a larger coverage and more accurate models as a result of that as well. The idea is, let's try to be that foundation for every player in the market to help them get an actionable perspective on that. So that means for the farmer, we backfill the data from satellite images, we connect to most farm management systems, and we generate revenue for them because of the kind of accuracy of the model. We have, for the project implementer, we have the models that are being approved by the standards. There's verification at high frequency, and we do the soil sampling design as part of that as well, and the impact tracking. For the supplier, again, we provide that scalable solution that is really key for them around the globe, and the geographic coverage, as well as for the FMCGs. They know what's coming their way, and they will know what the real impact is, and that's verified on the commodities that are acquiring. Some of the partners that we're working with across the globe, some of them thinking about carbon, some of them we supporting carbon projects, some of them are their own insetting projects, but they're also Scope 3 related, as well as kind of trying to monitor or predict the impact of new innovations using our models, and in that way kind of show the gap or the improvement that can be done. Covering that from project developers to the public sector and sustainability and LCA providers that way. And as I mentioned, farm management systems, we integrate that across the value chain as well. It more or less kind of comes in a simple workflow. I cannot do a demo, but happy to organize that. The kind of farmer onboarding, to be able to integrate with different systems. For the crops that were trained, it's typically like 2 or 3 weeks to get up and running. And that means also the kind of predictions and be able to provide a perspective on the projects. And very important, we really report in detail about the uncertainty of our models where we're unique. So we really provide the accuracy data, which then translates to the buffers that the projects need to do, which are limited but still very transparent for them, and to help and support the third-party verification. So we're designed to scale and to kind of help getting clarity about the ecosystem services and to allow all the players to benefit from that at the end as well. And for me, to close this, really, the more we can collaborate with partners in the supply chain, and we can calibrate these models, the faster we would be able to kind of deploy regenerative agriculture and share the meaningful impact of that. I personally, as I shared, would also be helped by that, but more importantly, the planet, but it would save me my tough conversations with my daughter as well. And that would also be welcome at a certain moment. Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, we have one question.
Yeah, so thanks a lot for this presentation. I myself work at a retailer, so I'm at a different stage of the full chain. What I try to understand, maybe you can educate me on the emissions of agriculture. When I think about carbon emissions, like transportation, logistics, but I don't really get what are plants emitting. They don't produce carbon emissions, right? They're distracted.
Yeah.
So what?
So there is a recommendation. Try to read Václav Smil, he does a really good break. The short version of that is basically the fertilizer is a key aspect there, because it takes a tremendous amount of energy to extract and get the nitrogen ready to get into the soil. And naturally, there are ways on how that nitrogen is being captured and renewed below soil, which you're trying to achieve. So that really is a big impact. The other thing of it is, if you're able to do this, it becomes a carbon sink, because you're rebuilding carbon below the soil, which has been depleted because of the monoculture, and just putting in the external nutrients via year by year, putting it in the ground. So those are the two high-level things that you should be thinking about.
Okay, thanks. And maybe in addition to that, so relatively is, if you look at the full chain of carbon emission, how big is that emission, do you think, if you compare it to transportation or?
What I know is Europe has its plan for kind of regreening and a net zero strategy, and they're expecting 10 to 20% of that to come out of the agriculture space. So there's large potential in that way.
Okay, thanks a lot.
So it's, yeah.
Thank you very much.